With its wide glass windows reflecting the city's liveliness, the luxury clothing store was located at the corner of a busy street in the heart of Atlanta's iconic Buckhead neighborhood. The business was well known for its designer brands, luxurious fabrics, and largely affluent elite customers. Everything inside was immaculate. Carefully placed racks held clothing that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and marble flooring glittered in the mellow lighting. Bill, the manager, enjoyed every aspect of the store, which was a location of prestige and a sign that you had succeeded in life. Bill was a slicked-back, early 40-year-old man with an unmistakable aura of superiority. One of his favorite things to do was to operate what he frequently referred to as a high-class establishment. The store represented his ability to serve the finest members of society, and to him, it was more than just a company. After working there for years and gradually moving up the ranks, he was given full management responsibility. From how the mannequins were dressed to how the customers, at least some of them, were handled, Bill made sure everything was just right. Bill considered a successful-looking person to be the perfect shopper. This typically meant being well-off, well-dressed, and most of the time, white. Customers who met that description were drawn to him, and he gave them special treatment and extra attention. He would silently reject everyone who didn't fit his expectations, though, because he thought they didn't belong. This day, Bill was standing close to the register, looking around the store with his keen eyes. He gave a lovely smile to a well-dressed couple who had just walked in, already thinking of ways to upsell them on some of the more costly products. Bill quietly instructed one of the salespeople to serve them as they approached the luxury jackets. Bill's focus changed as the door chimed. Another customer had come in, although he wasn't very interested in this one. She didn't have on fancy jewelry or fashionable clothes. Rather, she was dressed simply in trainers, slacks, and a loose jumper. Bill's eyes hardly noticed her, but she moved with effortless grace, her dark skin gleaming in the gentle illumination. She was just another bystander who was unlikely to make a purchase, in his opinion. It was Zendaya. Despite her casual clothes, Zendaya was a successful entrepreneur. Not even the employees, customers, or Bill knew that she had just purchased this store through a business investment agreement. Prior to her official presentation as the new owner, she had decided to visit the store covertly. Without the commotion that typically accompanies such an announcement, it was her method of observing how things were conducted. Zendaya noticed the small changes in energy as soon as she entered the store. The way the salespeople seemed to favor some clients while leaving others, like her, to fend for themselves was subtle but evident. Such treatment was nothing new to Zendaya. Even though she had already experienced it in many forms and locations, the fact that this was now her store made it hurt a little more today. She strolled over to a dress display and ran her fingertips over the material. She caught a glimpse of Bill standing at the register, conversing with the couple. He was obviously trying to impress them by smiling and pointing to various objects. It was impossible for Zendaya not to grin at herself. However, she was there to watch, not to be impressed. Bill gave her a fleeting glance before turning his head away. He had already written her off as an outsider. Unlike the others, he couldn't bring himself to greet her with the same warmth. Zendaya took note of the exchange but didn't panic. She only wanted fair treatment, not preferential care. She made mental notes as she browsed the store. Despite their apparent competence, the sales team's attention allocation was obviously biased. She noticed that one of the staff hovered close to a woman wearing high-end apparel, making recommendations and praises. At the same time, another customer, who seemed to be perusing with genuine interest, was given no attention at all. Zendaya began to wonder how much revenue the store had lost as a result of these subtle exclusionary practices. Zendaya had been watching the business for about an hour, taking detailed notes on how it was operated. She had witnessed enough to comprehend the culture that Bill had fostered. She was prepared to go now. However, Bill's gaze returned to her before she could reach the door. His expression was less subtle this time, and his gaze was more intent. Zendaya sensed that something had changed in his manner. She started towards the front, but Bill interrupted her as she passed one of the pricey clothing racks. This time, he was not smiling. His stance was rigid, and there was a trace of contempt in his voice. He said, "Excuse me, miss," but his tone made it obvious that this was not a kind offer of help. "Are you certain you're getting what you require? Maybe I may assist you in locating something more affordable." Calm as ever, Zendaya stopped and stared at him. She had witnessed this phenomenon in innumerable other locations, including restaurants, airports, and even the streets, in addition to shops like this one. Bill and others like him constantly believed they knew who belonged and who didn't, but they were typically mistaken. She looked him in the eyes calmly and evenly. "Thank you," she smiled politely in response. "I'm just looking." Bill's eyes wavered impatiently. He wasn't used to being dismissed, particularly by someone he had previously judged unworthy of the upscale goods in the store. He lowered his voice as though they were privy to some secret, cleared his throat, and moved closer. "I'm simply saying," he went on, "that we have a lot of unique things here. If you understand what I mean, only some have access to everything." Despite the weight of his remarks, Zendaya's expression remained unchanged. At least she wasn't here to dispute with him yet. Bill simply played a minor role in her larger objectives for this store. He had no reason to escalate the matter further because she just nodded. "I appreciate your concern," Zendaya responded steadily, "but I'm fine." Bill blinked, obviously surprised by her composed response. He appeared momentarily confused, uncertain of what to do. Before swiftly turning back to Zendaya, his gaze strayed to the register, where another client was receiving assistance. She knew he wasn't finished yet. Trying to gather himself, he continued, "Well, let me know if you need anything." Zendaya nodded to him once more before returning her attention to the screen she had been studying. She briefly believed that would be the last of it. However, she saw Bill following her as she made her way to the back of the store. Now, he was not trying to conceal it. His previous facade of politeness had vanished, and his features had hardened into a suspicious expression. Zendaya walked towards the velvet border, separating the more upscale merchandise from the rest of the store, pretending not to notice him. She was more than wealthy enough to buy anything in the department and had every right to be there. But as though it were a physical barrier, she could feel Bill's critical gaze. Determined not to let his opinion influence her, she crossed the rope. It was not long before he stepped in. Bill said forcefully, "Miss," and he reappeared next to her. This time, he did not feign assistance. "I'm going to have to ask you to stay in the front section of the store." Zendaya turned to face him, her face calm yet curious. "Excuse me?" "This area is reserved for our higher-end customers," he stated in a firm voice. "I'm sure you understand." Zendaya looked up. "And how exactly do you determine who qualifies as a higher-end customer?" Bill paused, obviously surprised by her transparency. His gaze moved to the few other customers in the store, most of whom were now observing the exchange with interest. He made a hasty effort to calm himself, but the tension was already rising. Bill said, "I don't mean anything by it," in a defensive tone. "It's just that this section, well, is not for everyone." Zendaya looked at him with a mixture of surprise and astonishment, her arms crossed. She was happy to let Bill continue talking, even though she wasn't sure he even understood how deeply he was burying himself. Calmly, she questioned, "And what makes you think it's not for me?" Bill grew more irritated, and his face reddened a little. "I just don't want anyone to get the wrong idea," he stated. "We've had incidents before, you know. People coming in, touching things they can't afford, even taking things." For a moment, Zendaya's composed expression wavered, and Bill noticed it. Her eyes flashed with wrath, which he regarded as evidence that he was correct. "So you think I'm here to steal something?" Zendaya asked in a forceful yet calm voice. Bill moved uneasily, but he had no intention of giving up. "I didn't say that," was his hasty response. "However, you must realize that I am in charge of this store, and that I cannot simply let anyone roam the private area. It's beneficial to you personally." Zendaya shook her head and laughed a little. "For my own good?" she asked again, her incredulity evident. Bill doubled down instead of backing off, even though he seemed to realize how silly he sounded. "Look, I don't want to cause a scene," he remarked, looking around at the steadily increasing number of patrons. "All I'm asking is that you abide by the store's guidelines. I will have to ask you to leave if you are unable to accomplish that." Zendaya squinted her eyes. She had endured enough patience. Bill's assumptions were one thing, but he was now going too far, and he wouldn't be able to turn back. Nevertheless, she remained calm and refused to give him the response he appeared to be expecting. Zendaya stated, "I'm not breaking any rules," in a steady voice. "I'm a customer, and I have the right to be here just like anyone else." Bill shook his head, obviously getting angrier by the moment. His voice was loud enough for others to hear, but he lowered it once more as he moved closer to her. "Look, lady," he growled, "you're disturbing the peace. I'm going to call security if you don't go now." Zendaya remained unflinching. She refused to back down, looking him in the eye with such intensity that he hesitated. The other patrons were now openly observing, chatting among themselves in an attempt to understand what was going on. But Bill didn't seem to realize that he was getting himself into more trouble. Zendaya responded, "Call security if you want," in a composed yet firm voice. "But I'm not going anywhere." Bill paused for a second. There was a glimmer of uncertainty in his eyes for the first time, and it was obvious that he didn't expect her to challenge him. However, it was soon over, and the same haughtiness that had driven his actions since Zendaya first entered the room took its place. "Fine," said Bill abruptly. "Is that how you want to play it? We'll wait and see what security has to say." Zendaya stood as he turned and strode towards the rear of the store. The other patrons, some of whom were looking at her with interest and others with contempt, were now whispering even louder. Zendaya, however, was unconcerned. She wasn't going to allow Bill to scare her, because she had faced much worse. She sensed the situation's weight looming over the business while she waited. The mood had changed from relaxed shopping to anxious expectations. Everybody was anticipating what would come next. Zendaya, however, maintained her composure and kept her eyes on the goal. Bill came back a few minutes later, accompanied by 2 security officers. His expression was one of victory, as though he had already won the fight. The guards appeared unsure, but they took Bill's lead and moved cautiously towards Zendaya. With a courteous yet forceful tone, one of the guards stated, "Ma'am, we're going to have to ask you to leave the store." Zendaya's expression was neutral as she gazed at him. "And why is that?" The guard paused, looking at Bill for direction. Bill took a step forward, ready to assume command. He spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "She's been causing a disturbance by disobeying the store's regulations. That kind of behavior is not acceptable here." Zendaya shook her head and gave a little sigh. Bill was obviously not going to back down, even though she had offered him numerous opportunities to halt this. He had now turned it into a public event. Zendaya stated, "I'm not causing a disturbance," in a calm and clear manner. "I'm simply shopping, just like everyone else." The guard shuffled uneasily, obviously unsure of how to respond. He looked around at the other patrons, some seeming not to notice, others gazing closely. The guard added in a hushed tone, "Look, ma'am, I don't want to make this any more difficult than need be. Can we just stay out of the spotlight?" Zendaya's eyes twitched with annoyance. Bill desired a public humiliation, a display that would demonstrate to everyone in the store that individuals such as her were out of place. Firmly, "I'm not leaving," Zendaya declared. "I haven't done anything wrong." Bill stepped forward once more, his voice rising as his face contorted with rage. He angrily remarked, "You've done plenty wrong. You have no place here? You're making my employees uncomfortable by lingering and causing disruptions. I'll have these men escort you out, or you can leave now." Zendaya remained still. She refused to back down, her eyes fixed on Bill's enraged ones. Even though the tension in the store increased with every second that went by, Zendaya refused to back down. Bill's words hurt her, but she kept it to herself. These instances, in which her career, riches, and dignity were questioned based solely on her appearance, were nothing new to her. However, today wasn't just another opportunity to ignore the taunts. The focus of today was transition. She sensed that the customers were observing her, some with pity and others with disapproval, but that didn't matter right now. Bill and the decision he was about to make were the center of her attention. Rather than making things worse, Zendaya calmed herself by taking a deep breath. She had not yet disclosed her identity. Although Bill's actions were wrong, she wanted to give him one final chance to behave civilly. After all, even someone with his level of prejudice deserves the opportunity to change their ways. She spoke in a calm voice. "I want to talk to the owner of the store." Bill was surprised at how composed her tone was. He had anticipated more opposition, possibly a scene. However, he was caught off guard by Zendaya's calm suggestion. He hesitated for a little moment, but it was brief. Bill chuckled dismissively as a smirk appeared on his face. His arrogance was evident as he repeated, "You want to speak to the owner?" The owner won't waste their time on someone like you, lady. Zendaya arched an eyebrow, but she remained unfazed by his remarks. Someone like me? She inquired coolly, and he explained. Bill's grin widened as he shrugged. I'm trying to be kind here, you see. Real consumers, high-end customers who truly belong in our store, are dealt with by the proprietor. You're asking for something that is completely above your capabilities after already making a scene. Let's just end the day, shall we? Zendaya's eyes remained fixed. I would like to speak with the owner. It's not unreasonable to ask for that. Bill was growing increasingly irritated, and his patience was wearing thin. You're not paying attention. The owner doesn't have time for such crap, as I've already stated. Would you mind simply leaving before things worsen? Zendaya remained composed and refused to be agitated, even though she could see where this was going. Although she realized that now was not the time to quarrel, she wasn't going to allow him to intimidate her into leaving. Bill's conceit was so ingrained that he failed to see the seriousness of his actions. It was time for her to take charge if he refused to listen to reason. Zendaya answered softly and steadily. All right. I'll leave if you won't let me talk to the owner. Bill appeared nearly victorious, as though he had achieved a victory. With a dismissive wave of his hand, he nodded. Good decision. Well, if you would just... Zendaya interrupted him by saying, But I will be back. Bill didn't seem to really comprehend the weight of her statements, but the other employees and a few bystanders did. They paused because of something in the way she stated it. Bill, however, missed the meaning because he was preoccupied with his own sense of superiority. He turned away as he mumbled, Yeah. Just make sure you don't return unless you intend to make a purchase. Zendaya didn't answer. Her steps were slow and measured as she strolled calmly towards the exit. Ignorant of the fury he had just unleashed, Bill watched her go with a smug look. Having maintained her poise, Zendaya took a big breath outside. She wasn't upset, at least not in the sense Bill most likely thought. Anger rarely solved anything, as she had discovered long ago. She now experienced a silent resolve. More than merely making amends, the goal was to ensure that Bill and those like him would never again abuse someone in such a manner. Then she took her phone out of her purse. Now was the moment to implement her strategy. She called John, a shrewd and astute lawyer who had accompanied her during the entire buying process and was her business partner. When he picked up, she continued, John, we have to do something. Immediately, John's tone changed on the other end. What took place? Zendaya briefed him on the circumstances, outlining Bill's actions and his treatment of her. Ever the professional, John listened intently, but as she described what had happened, Zendaya could sense the underlying annoyance in his voice. He summoned you to security. Is that true? Inquired John. Yes, Zendaya affirmed, but it doesn't get any worse than that. It's his demeanor, how he handles clients, particularly those who don't match his definition of high-end. This is about the culture he has established in that store, not just about me. John remained quiet for a while, taking it all in. At last, he said, All right. What is the strategy? Zendaya had already made up her mind when she looked back at the store's entrance. She declared, I'm returning, but I'm bringing you and the rest of the team along. Bill needs to meet the true owner now. John chuckled quietly. This will be a fascinating experience. Zendaya grinned, but her smile was devoid of humor. You don't know. Later that day, the store's ambiance had settled back into its typical cadence. Bill, feeling quite good about himself, had returned to managing the employees and making sure everything was going as planned. The woman he had escorted out earlier had not been on his mind much. She was simply another unwelcome customer in his opinion, a small annoyance in an otherwise productive day. However, that feeling of fulfillment was short-lived. Zendaya walked back into the store as the front door opened, marking the beginning of it. But this time, she wasn't by herself. Wearing a well-tailored business suit, she emanated an unmistakable sense of power. Two well-dressed solicitors, including John, and a handful of acquaintances flanked her. Their arrival at once demanded attention, and as heads turned to observe, the typical buzz of activity in the store slowed. Bill, who had been close to the rear of the shop, scowled when he saw the group. At first, he didn't recognize Zendaya because she had changed from her previous informal clothes to a businesslike one that exuded authority and success. He briefly believed she was simply another affluent customer. However, the realization struck him like a ton of bricks when their eyes locked. His face went white. With a determined gait, Zendaya's face was unreadable. Bill rushed to get better. In an attempt to hide his astonishment behind a facade of professionalism, he straightened his posture, but the damage was already done. The other employees looked on in disbelief, not knowing what was going on, but feeling that something significant was going to happen. Bill rushed over, nervousness taking the place of his former cockiness. He forced a smile and muttered, "Ma'am, I didn't think I'd see you again so quickly. Can I be of any assistance to you?" Zendaya took a while to respond. Rather, she allowed her eyes to wander throughout the store, taking in the view of the employees and customers who were all observing the action. Her voice was quiet when she finally spoke, but it was clearly authoritative. She said, "I want to talk to the store owner." Bill blinked in confusion for a second. "The owner?" he said again, his tone wavering. "Yes," Zendaya said with ease. "The proprietor." At that moment, Bill started to feel the full impact of what she had spoken. He opened his mouth to answer, but his lips did not open. His face paled as the realization struck him like a goods train. After giving him a chance to think, Zendaya went on. "The owner wouldn't waste their time on someone like me, I think you stated earlier." Bill's mouth dropped a little, but he remained silent. Now the other employees were staring and whispering to one another in low voices. The atmosphere in the store changed dramatically when everyone realized the reality. Zendaya moved forward and met Bill's gaze. "Please allow me to present myself. I am Zendaya Coleman, the store's recent owner." As though the words had struck him in the body, Bill stumbled back. His previous arrogance had vanished entirely, leaving him paralyzed with fear. Everyone in the store seemed to be holding their breath, anticipating what would happen next, and the stillness was deafening. Zendaya gave him little time to respond. She pointed to John and the other solicitors on her team. She went on, "These are my associates. With immediate effect, we are here to discuss some changes that need to be made to the way this store is run." Like a fish out of water, Bill's mouth moved back and forth. He was at a loss for words and could not turn back from the mess he had made. He had humiliated and ridiculed the owner of the store he believed he controlled. John moved ahead and took out some documents. With a professional yet forceful tone, he stated, "Miss Coleman has been reviewing the operations of this store, and let's just say there are some serious concerns about how things have been handled, starting with your behavior today." Bill couldn't speak. There was nothing he could do to stop his world from collapsing around him. With a weak voice, Bill stumbled. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." John silently stood at Zendaya's side, serving as a constant reminder of how serious the situation was. But Zendaya stayed composed, watching Bill writhe with an inscrutable face. Zendaya crossed her arms and said calmly, "I'm sure you didn't." "But that doesn't alter the facts, does it?" Bill gulped forcefully, his thoughts rushing to think of some answer, something that might save him. He replied in a now pleading tone, I made a mistake. I didn't mean it at all. I simply assumed that you were a client who didn't you?" Zendaya cut in, her tone still soothing, but now more acerbic. "Didn't belong in this place?" Bill shook his head angrily, his eyes wide. No, I did not mean that. You didn't look like you usually do, so I wasn't sure." Mid-sentence, Zendaya interrupted him with a raised hand. "What's the norm, Bill? The typical client? The typical individual you believe should be accorded dignity?" Bill's face turned beetroot red, and he was clearly embarrassed, struggling to find the right words. No, I didn't think. I'm truly sorry. There was a miscommunication." Zendaya sighed quietly, her patience wearing thin. "Bill, are you even aware of how disrespectful and prejudiced your actions were today? You made assumptions about who should be at this store based on my appearance. And it wasn't just me. I've witnessed your treatment of other clients who don't conform to your limited definition of what's appropriate." As Bill surveyed the store, his panic grew. The other patrons who had witnessed his treatment of Zendaya began to whisper among themselves. Some who had supported him before now moved uneasily. "I promise it wasn't deliberate," Bill said in desperation. "I was merely attempting to fulfill my duties. I didn't intend to—" "Your job is to treat every customer with respect, regardless of how they look or what you assume about them," Zendaya interrupted once more, her voice becoming stronger. "That's not what you did. Instead, You decided to degrade me and make me feel alienated. If someone else didn't match your limited idea of what this store should be, you would have treated them the same way. Bill's body was tense with terror, as if he might faint. He begged, "Please, Miss Coleman, I'm begging you. I'll perform better. I'll be different. I didn't intend to offend you. Although it was a grave error, I swear I'll correct it." For a moment, Zendaya looked at him thoughtfully. She knew he was apologizing more to protect himself than out of true regret for his actions. Still, she gave him the chance to explain, though it was clear it wasn't helping. Zendaya remarked, "I gave you chances, Bill. You laughed in my face when I asked to talk to the owner earlier. You had the chance to change your approach and behave differently, but you chose to double down instead. You were conceited, contemptuous, and biased." Bill felt his heart pounding in his chest. His entire career, his livelihood, was on the line. The weight of his mistakes was unbearable, and he had no justifications left. He pleaded, "Please, Miss Coleman," his voice trembling. "I'll do whatever it takes to put this right. I don't want to get laid off. I'll take the initiative. I'll recover. Please don't fire me." Zendaya's eyebrows lifted, but her eyes remained cold. "Being better isn't a favor you're doing for me," she replied. "You were supposed to meet the minimum standard, but now I have to question if you're the right person to run this shop moving forward, and if you can create a welcoming and courteous atmosphere for everyone." Bill looked like he might cry, his face crumpling. As he made one last attempt to argue his case, his desperation was palpable. "Please, Miss Coleman, I've spent years working here. I've stuck with this store because of its reputation. I didn't know. Give me a chance to remedy this." Zendaya allowed a moment of silence, watching Bill as he realized how much damage he had done. However, her focus shifted from him to the store's culture and the kind of environment she wanted to foster. Finally, she spoke, "Bill, I'm going to give you a deadline. I will immediately terminate you unless you willingly resign as manager with immediate effect." Bill stared at her in disbelief, his breath catching. He wasn't prepared for such a blunt, uncompromising response. His mind raced as he tried to comprehend the seriousness of her words. Zendaya continued in a fair but stern tone, "From now on, this store will be run differently. Every customer will be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their background, race, or appearance. You have no place here if you are unable to adhere to that." Bill seemed to have the wind knocked out of him. His mouth opened to speak, but no words came out. There was no turning back now. His arrogance and pride had brought him to this moment of humiliation. The store's patrons and employees continued to watch in stunned silence, the murmurs growing louder. They had just witnessed Bill's downfall. While some appeared uncomfortable, others seemed almost relieved that justice was being served. After a long pause, Bill muttered, "I'll step down," in a barely audible voice. Zendaya nodded, her face still composed but resolute. "That's the right choice." John moved forward, offering Bill a pen and some resignation papers. Bill's face flushed with embarrassment as he took the pen, his hands shaking. With a trembling hand, he wrote his name on the paper, formally resigning as the manager. Zendaya stepped closer to Bill after the papers were signed, her voice now lower but stern. "Bill, I hope you learn a lesson from this. You must reflect on the reasons behind your actions and how you can improve going forward. Learning from your mistakes is more important than simply losing your job." Bill couldn't meet her gaze and nodded numbly, too defeated to do anything else. With what little dignity he had left, he began to walk toward the back of the store. As Bill made his way out, his shoulders hunched and his face pale, the atmosphere in the store was heavy with tension. The employees exchanged glances, their eyes flicking between Zendaya and the retreating figure of Bill. The change was palpable. Zendaya took a deep breath, allowing herself a moment to process what had just transpired. Bill's actions had left her with no choice, though she hadn't come here looking for conflict. As the new owner, she had a responsibility to correct the culture and ensure the store would be a place of dignity and respect for everyone. John spoke softly as he leaned in. His voice was quiet but comforting. "That went as well as could be expected," he said. "What's your next move?" Zendaya looked around the store, her eyes scanning the mix of confused and interested faces. Some employees appeared nervous, wondering if their jobs were in jeopardy, while others seemed almost relieved, sensing a change in the air. It was clear that Bill's management style had created a toxic environment that reached far beyond just the customers. Zendaya replied gently, We need to address everyone. It's time to set a new tone for this place." With a nod, John moved to gather the rest of their team. Meanwhile, Zendaya stood tall, moving forward to address the crowd. Her presence was commanding, and without uttering a single word, she drew the attention of the entire store. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began in a steady, clear voice, "I would like to offer my apologies for the disruption you witnessed today. The principles that this store will adhere to moving forward were not reflected in what you saw." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. Some patrons leaned in, eager to understand more, while others nodded in agreement. "As of now, I am the new owner of this establishment. My name is Zendaya Coleman. I must admit, I was disappointed by what I saw when I visited earlier to observe how things were being conducted." Zendaya looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as she could. This store is known for its exclusivity and luxury, but over time, that exclusivity turned into prejudice. That's over now. A murmur swept through the crowd. Some of the regular customers, realizing their own complicity in the store's toxic culture, shifted uncomfortably. But others, inspired by Zendaya's words, stood a little taller, especially those who had previously felt unwelcome. "From now on, this store will be a place of inclusivity and respect," Zendaya continued, her voice growing stronger. "Our true luxury will lie in the way we treat each and every person who walks through these doors, even as we continue to offer the finest products." She gestured toward the entrance, where a group of confused prospective customers had gathered, drawn in by the commotion inside. In stark contrast to the cold reception they would have received earlier, Zendaya gave them a warm, welcoming smile. "I sincerely apologize to those of you who have felt uncomfortable here in the past," she said, her tone genuine. "Please give us another opportunity. As we make these necessary changes, I ask for your cooperation. True class is about uplifting everyone, not excluding others." A spontaneous round of applause erupted from the crowd. It started with a few individuals near the front, but quickly spread across the entire store. Even some of the employees who had been anxious moments before joined in, their faces reflecting a mix of relief and hope for the future. John handed Zendaya a stack of documents. She gave him a quick nod of thanks before turning back to the employees and customers still present in the store. "I need to address the employees now," Zendaya began, her voice firm yet calming. "Everyone currently working, please gather near the main counter. To make this transition easier for our customers, we will be closing the store early today. I deeply regret any inconvenience this may cause." As the patrons started to file out, some paused to offer Zendaya kind words of support. An elderly woman, draped in pearls and a silk blouse, approached with misty eyes. "I've been coming here for 30 years, she said, her voice trembling. "And I'm embarrassed to admit that I never spoke up when I saw others being mistreated. Thank you for doing what was necessary." Zendaya squeezed her hand gently. "I appreciate your honesty," she replied. "It's never too late to stand up for what's right." Once the last customer had left, Zendaya turned her attention to the employees. They were now gathered near the counter, their expressions ranging from anxious to hopeful. There was a mix of backgrounds and experiences among the group, and Zendaya reflected on how many of them had endured the toxic environment that Bill had cultivated. "First of all," Zendaya began, her voice warm but authoritative, "I want to reassure you that your jobs are secure. What happened with Bill today was a consequence of his behavior and the toxic culture he promoted. It doesn't reflect on any of you." A collective sigh of relief swept through the group. Some employees exchanged smiles, while others seemed to relax their tense shoulders. "However," Zendaya continued, her tone becoming more serious, "we will be implementing some significant changes to how this business operates. I need your full support in creating a more welcoming and respectful environment for every customer who walks through our doors." She scanned the room, meeting the eyes of each employee. "Now is the time to express any concerns you may have about your ability to commit to these changes. We'll offer references and help you find new work if necessary, with no judgment. But from this moment forward, there will be no tolerance for any form of disrespect or prejudice, whether it's directed at our customers or colleagues." The room fell silent as the employees considered her words. Then a voice spoke up. A young woman, Pamela, from the back of the room, raised her hand hesitantly. "Miss Coleman," Pamela said, her voice quiet but steady. "I've been here for 2 years, and I've seen a lot of things I didn't agree with. I was too scared to speak out, but I want you to know that I fully support these changes. Thank you for doing this." Zendaya smiled at Pamela. "Thank you for your honesty, Pamela," she replied warmly. "You're valued here, and your voice matters. I'm glad you feel safe enough to speak up now." Encouraged by Pamela's bravery, other employees began to share their stories. Zachary, a young salesman, recounted how he had been instructed to target certain customers based solely on their appearance. Chad, a middle-aged employee, shared his frustration at being passed over for promotions despite his years of experience. As Zendaya listened to their stories, a mix of sorrow and resolve filled her heart. She hadn't realized just how deep the issues ran within the store, but she felt empowered by the fact that so many of her employees were eager for change. Zendaya took a moment to collect herself before speaking again. "Thank you all for sharing your experiences. Your insight is invaluable as we move forward. Now, let's talk about the specific changes we'll be making." She gestured to John, who began distributing packets to each employee. "These packets contain our updated company policies regarding employee behavior, anti-discrimination, and customer service. Please review them carefully. Over the next few weeks, we will conduct training sessions to ensure everyone understands and is prepared to implement these changes." Zendaya's voice gained strength as she continued. "In addition to these internal changes, we're also going to adjust our marketing and inventory. We will continue to provide high-end luxury goods, but we will broaden our selection to include more diverse styles, sizes, and price points. We want every customer, no matter their background, to feel like they belong here." The employees nodded in agreement, and some began to talk excitedly among themselves, brainstorming new ideas. Zendaya knew that these changes were only the beginning, but the energy in the room was palpable. Zendaya cleared her throat to regain attention. "We will also be introducing a new feedback system. Customers and employees will be able to report any concerns or issues anonymously. This will help us continue to improve and ensure everyone feels heard." The employees murmured with approval, and Zendaya continued, "As for leadership, we'll be promoting from within. I want to see who exemplifies the values we're striving for, who takes initiative to put our new policies into practice, and who shows true leadership potential." The room became charged with anticipation. Some employees straightened up, eyes widening as the prospect of promotion loomed. Zendaya smiled slightly, sensing the shift in energy. "This is your time to show me what you're capable of," she said, her tone firm but encouraging. "Think of it as an audition. Show me how you can contribute to creating the inclusive, respectful environment we are committed to. This is not just about sales. It's about leadership, respect, and service." The employees were clearly inspired. The uncertainty that had initially gripped them seemed to dissipate, replaced with a renewed sense of purpose. Zendaya clapped her hands together. "We still have a lot of work ahead of us, but I believe in all of you. Let's get started. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask." The room erupted in hands raised in questions. For the next hour, Zendaya worked with her employees, answering queries, solving problems, and discussing ideas. As the last question was addressed, the sun began to set outside, casting a warm glow through the store's large windows. As the meeting wrapped up, Zendaya noticed Pamela lingering near the counter. She walked over to the young woman, who looked nervous but excited. "Pamela, right?" Zendaya asked, smiling warmly. "Is everything okay?" Pamela nodded, her hands twisting nervously. "Miss Coleman, I just wanted to thank you again for everything you're doing. I have some ideas about how we can make this store more welcoming. Would it be okay if I shared them with you?" Zendaya's face lit up. "Of course, Pamela. How about you come in a little early tomorrow? We can have coffee and discuss your ideas before the store opens." Pamela's face brightened. "Really? That would be amazing. Thank you so much, Miss Coleman." As Pamela rushed out to gather her things, Zendaya felt a wave of satisfaction. This was just the beginning of something bigger. Change was never easy, but it was necessary. And with the support of her team, Zendaya knew that they could make the store in Atlanta a place where every customer was treated with dignity and respect. John approached, his smile faint but sincere. "Looks like you've got them fired up," he said. "Do you think this place has a chance?" Zendaya turned her gaze around the store, the energy of the room palpable. "More than a chance, John. We're going to make this place something special, but it won't be easy, and we'll face opposition along the way. But I'm ready for it." And with that, Zendaya knew that they were on the path to creating a store that would not only sell luxury, but also offer something far more valuable: true inclusivity, respect, and leadership. Zendaya and John started a last tour of the store as the remaining employees left, saying their goodbyes. They reviewed the new policies, discussed logistics, and planned how to handle the upcoming challenges. By the time they were finished, it was long past closing. Before setting the alarm, Zendaya stood at the door and glanced at the store one last time. She could practically see the promise of what this space would become, gleaming in the silence of the empty room. "Ready to go?" John asked, holding the door open. Zendaya gave a nod and stepped into the refreshing evening breeze of Atlanta. As they strolled along the street with the store's windows softly shining behind them, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was prepared for the opportunities and challenges that would arise tomorrow. The next morning, the brilliant sunrise in Atlanta symbolized the new beginning for the store. With a box of pastries in one hand and a tray of coffee cups in the other, Zendaya arrived early. From the very start, she aimed to establish a welcoming, inclusive, and purpose-driven atmosphere. To her surprise, Pamela was waiting with a big notebook clutched to her chest as she unlocked the front door. Zendaya smiled at the young woman's eagerness. "Good morning, Pamela," Zendaya greeted warmly. "I see that you're as excited as I am for today. Come on in." They took a seat at a small table in the back of the store. As Zendaya poured coffee, the early morning sunlight flooded through the windows, casting a golden glow on the displays. Pamela began to flip through her journal. "Miss Coleman, I hope you don't mind, but I stayed up most of the night working on these ideas," Pamela said in an excited yet anxious voice. "I've been thinking about ways we could make the store more inclusive for a long time, but I never felt like I could speak up before." Zendaya leaned in, her interest piqued. "I'm all yours, Pamela, and please call me Zendaya." As they drank coffee and munched on pastries, Pamela presented several well-thought-out and creative suggestions. She proposed changing the store's layout for better accessibility, collaborating with local artists from diverse backgrounds to showcase their work, and even suggested a community outreach initiative to provide styling classes for people of all shapes and sizes. Zendaya listened attentively, occasionally taking notes or asking questions. She was impressed by Pamela's enthusiasm and thoughtfulness. This young woman had clearly been quietly strategizing for change and waiting for a chance to make a difference. Pamela eagerly looked at Zendaya as she presented her final suggestion. "Well?" Pamela asked, anticipation clear in her voice. Zendaya grinned widely as she set down her coffee cup. "Pamela, these ideas are fantastic," she said warmly. "You've clearly put a lot of thought into them, and I can see that you're passionate about making this store better. I want to implement a few of these right away, and I'll be looking more closely at the others." Pamela's face lit up with relief and excitement. "Really? Do you mean it?" Zendaya nodded. "Of course. In fact, I want you to take charge of some of these projects. You have a clear vision of what this store could become, and I need people like you who are eager to lead and take initiative." Tears welled up in Pamela's eyes, and she quickly wiped them away. "I'm so grateful, Zendaya. This means more to me than I can say. Fashion has always been my passion, but I've hated how exclusive it is. I want to help change that." Zendaya squeezed Pamela's hand across the table. "You will, Pamela. We both will. Now, let's get to work on turning these ideas into a reality." As other employees began to show up for work, Zendaya greeted each person warmly, ensuring they felt appreciated and welcomed. The energy in the store was noticeably different from the previous day, filled with nervous excitement and determination. It was clear that the store was entering a new era. Once everyone had arrived, Zendaya called a brief morning meeting. She outlined the objectives for the day, reminded the staff about the new policies, and emphasized how important it was to make every customer feel valued and respected. "Remember," Zendaya said, making eye contact with each employee, "we're selling more than just clothing today. We're selling an experience, one that's inclusive, respectful, and genuinely concerned with our clients' needs. Every interaction is a chance to live out these values." As the staff cheered in agreement, a sense of unity filled the room. They were ready for the changes ahead. Just before opening time, the front door chimed, and everyone turned toward it. Zendaya's eyes widened in surprise as she saw Bill standing in the doorway. He looked out of place without his usual confidence. standing awkwardly as he shuffled from foot to foot. When he saw Zendaya, he focused on her and spoke softly, almost in a whisper. I hope you don't mind me coming by," he stammered. "I just wanted to offer a sincere apology." Zendaya cautiously walked toward him, aware that all eyes were on them. "I appreciate you coming back, Bill. I imagine this wasn't easy." Bill nodded and swallowed hard. "I couldn't stop thinking about everything that happened yesterday, my words, my actions. I'm embarrassed. I've realized I've been wrong about so many people, not just you, Miss Coleman." Zendaya listened quietly, her expression neutral yet attentive. Bill's shoulders were slumped under the weight of his remorse, and she could see the sincerity in his eyes. "I don't expect forgiveness," Bill continued, his voice gaining strength. "I'm not asking for my job back. I just wanted to apologize to you, and to everyone I've wronged with my behavior." He turned toward the employees who were watching the exchange with a mix of surprise and disbelief. "I owe all of you an apology. I created a toxic environment here, and I was a poor leader. I'm really sorry." The room was silent for a moment. Then, to everyone's shock, Pamela stepped forward and softly said, "Thank you, Bill. That must have been hard to say." Other employees nodded in agreement, murmuring their support. The tension in the room slowly dissolved, replaced by a sense of closure. Zendaya spoke up in a firm but kind tone. "Bill, I appreciate you returning and offering your apology. It shows a level of courage and introspection that I hope you continue to develop. While the past can't be changed, we can grow from it and move forward." Bill blinked back tears as he nodded. "I plan to. I've decided to take some time off and possibly volunteer. I want to work on myself and learn how to treat people with the respect they deserve." Zendaya smiled warmly. "That sounds like a great plan, Bill. I wish you all the best on your journey." As Bill turned to leave, Zendaya called after him. "And Bill, if you ever want to come back as a customer, you'll be welcome here, just like anyone else." Bill's eyes softened with gratitude, and he gave a nod before exiting. The door chimed softly behind him. Zendaya turned back to her team, seeing the shift in their expressions. The last remnants of the old leadership were gone, making way for a fresh start. This was the beginning of something new in Atlanta, and they were ready to build it together. Zendaya clapped her hands together and smiled at her team. "All right, team," she exclaimed, her voice filled with enthusiasm. "That was a surprising but significant way to begin the day. Let's now concentrate on the future. In 5 minutes, we will open. Keep in mind that today is about fresh starts for this store, our customers, and ourselves. Let's make it worthwhile." With a fresh vitality in their steps, the employees scattered to their posts, preparing for the busy day ahead. Zendaya moved to the front of the store, placing her hand on the latch. As the clock struck opening time, she turned the key and opened the door wide. The store was ready to welcome a new era. The first customer to walk in was an older woman Zendaya had spoken to the day before. The woman paused at the door, taking in the space as though it were her first time. "Welcome," Zendaya said warmly. "We're so glad to have you here." The woman smiled. "Thank you, my love. I have to admit, this environment feels lighter. It's different, but in a good way." As the day unfolded, more customers arrived, some regulars curious about the changes, and others newcomers drawn by the friendly, inviting atmosphere. Zendaya watched with pride as her employees engaged with customers in ways that aligned with the store's new mission of inclusivity. Pamela was busy helping a group of young customers, ones who had been excluded in the past. Chad was guiding an elderly man through the newly redesigned layout, making sure he was comfortable with the changes. Meanwhile, Zachary was in a lively conversation with a customer about the local artists whose work now adorned the store's walls. Despite the challenges, Zendaya was thrilled by the positive response. Some loyal customers voiced their discomfort with the changes, expressing that they felt the store was becoming too inclusive. A few even stormed out, vowing to take their business elsewhere. But for every customer lost, 2 new ones seemed to enter, eager to experience the more welcoming environment. Throughout the day, Zendaya remained active, helping her team and offering guidance where needed. As the day came to a close, Zendaya felt both exhausted and excited for what lay ahead. As the store neared closing time, a young woman entered, clearly uneasy. She looked around, feeling out of place in the luxurious surroundings. Zendaya knew this was a moment for Pamela to shine. Pamela approached the young woman with a warm, inviting smile. "Hi there. Can I help you find anything?" Pamela asked, her voice kind and judgment-free. The girl hesitated, glancing nervously at the price tags. "I'm not sure if I can afford anything here. I just wanted to look around." Pamela smiled even brighter. "No problem at all. Whether you're shopping or just browsing, everyone is welcome here. Let me show you some of our new arrivals. I think you'll like them." As Pamela led the young woman through the store, pointing out items in various price ranges, Zendaya watched from a distance. By the time their tour ended, the young woman was smiling and chatting with Pamela. She promised to return for her next purchase, and Zendaya felt a wave of pride wash over her. She had set out to create an inclusive, welcoming space, and seeing this interaction affirmed that they were on the right path. After locking the doors for the evening, Zendaya gathered her team for one final meeting of the day. The atmosphere was different from when they had first arrived that morning. The nervousness and uncertainty had transformed into pride and excitement. Zendaya addressed her team with a heartfelt tone. "I want to thank each and every one of you. Today wasn't just about selling products. It was about setting a new standard, showing the world what this store can be, and you all rose to the challenge beautifully." She highlighted individual moments from the day: Zachary's enthusiasm for supporting local artists, Chad's patience with elderly customers, and Pamela's empathy for the young woman who felt out of place. With each example, Zendaya could see her employees' smiles grow wider. "This is just the beginning," she continued, her voice full of resolve. "We still have a long way to go, and I know there will be challenges ahead. But I'm confident that, together, we'll succeed. We're going to rethink what luxury means in this industry. The way we make customers feel when they walk through our doors will matter more than the price tag on the clothes." As the meeting ended, the staff dispersed, excitedly talking about the day's events. Zendaya felt a tap on her shoulder and turned to see John standing there, a grin on his face. "Well, I think the first day went well," John remarked. "You've really shaken things up here." Zendaya chuckled, relieved. "There's no doubt that we're off to a strong start, but we still have a long way to go." John nodded, his expression more serious. "You know, when we first bought this store, I thought it was just another business deal. But after seeing you today, and how you've already started changing things, I think we may be on to something bigger." Zendaya's eyes gleamed with determination. "Yes, John, we are. Making a profit is not the only goal here. It's about changing the fashion industry's perspective on respect and inclusivity. And if we can do it here, in one of Buckhead's most upscale stores, then we can do it anywhere." John grinned. "You might be starting a revolution here, Zendaya." Zendaya smiled, momentarily distracted by the exciting possibilities. "A retail revolution. That sounds perfect to me." As they left the store, Zendaya paused and glanced back. The lights were dimming inside, but she could still see the changes they had made. The reconfigured layout, the local artwork on the walls, the diverse mannequins in the windows. It felt right. The store was no longer just a business. It was a space for something greater. "You know," Zendaya said quietly, "when I first bought this store, I saw it as a challenge, a way to prove myself in the business world. But now, I think it might be more. Maybe it's a calling." John squeezed her shoulder. "You, Zendaya, have the power to change this industry. But don't forget to pace yourself. Just like Rome wasn't built in a day, neither will your vision." Zendaya nodded, taking a deep breath of the chilly Atlanta night air. "You're right. We've made a fantastic start, but there's much more to do. Pamela's already suggested we begin working on those community outreach initiatives tomorrow. We also need to connect with more local designers, especially from underrepresented groups, and we should consider holding seminars on sustainable fashion." John raised his hands in mock surrender. All right. Let's celebrate today's success first. Dinner's on me." Zendaya's mind was already buzzing with future thoughts as they strolled down the street in Buckhead. She was aware that there would be obstacles in the form of uncooperative clients, opposition from the industry, and the ongoing battle to strike a balance between profitability and their new moral principles. After today, though, she also realized that she had a group of people who shared her belief in her goal. Once a representation of discrimination and exclusivity, this store was on its way to becoming something quite different, a lighthouse of respect, inclusivity, and constructive change in the fashion industry. Zendaya was prepared to take the lead. One modest revolution at a time, one day, one consumer. A feeling of calm descended upon Zendaya as the store behind them vanished into the distance. She was prepared for all of the opportunities and challenges that were ahead of her tomorrow. The best was yet to come. The voyage had only just begun. Weeks became months, and Zendaya's idea for the store started to solidify. Not only were the merchandise and structure of the business altered, but the overall vibe of the establishment also changed. There was a sense of warmth and welcome where there had previously been a sense of judgment and exclusivity. However, difficulties accompanied the shift, and Zendaya had to negotiate ever more complex situations. The first significant test of their new policies came on a busy Saturday afternoon in Buckhead. Pamela, a little breathless, rushed into Zendaya's office as she and John were going over the most recent sales numbers. "Zendaya, we have a situation," her normally composed demeanor falling away. "There's a customer? Well, she's causing quite a scene." Zendaya got to her feet. "What's happening?" Pamela briefed her as they rushed to the sales floor. One of the fresher sales assistants was being reprimanded by a longtime customer, notorious for her pricey choices and challenging demeanor. The problem? The store's new, more inclusive size policy. Zendaya heard the customer's high-pitched voice breaking through the normal din of the shop as they got closer. "This is ridiculous," the woman said, gesturing with a high-end gown. Zendaya went closer, but she trailed off. "You've ruined the exclusivity of this brand by catering to..." But the insinuation was obvious. The young salesperson's face was on the verge of tears, and the woman's was flushed with rage. "Is there a problem here?" Zendaya positioned herself between the associate and the customer and inquired softly. The woman looked at Zendaya. "You're absolutely correct. There is an issue. Never in my 20 years of shopping here have I felt so disrespected. How dare you use oversized options to dilute these luxury brands?" "It's inclusivity," Zendaya added in a firm but level voice. "It is representative of our diverse customer base and in line with our commitment to making fashion accessible to all." The woman stammered, taken aback by Zendaya's bluntness. "It's not right," she said at last. Zendaya went on to explain, "This store used to stand for something." The woman's anger seemed to subside, but her confusion lingered. Zendaya nodded in agreement. "You're right. There was something this store stood for. It represented exclusivity and serving a small group of people at the expense of others. However, we no longer stand for that." Zendaya pointed to the store, which was now crowded with shoppers of all shapes, sizes, and ethnicities. "We stand for the belief that everyone deserves to feel beautiful and valued," she continued. "Luxury isn't about exclusion, but about how an item makes you feel when you wear it." The woman's rage appeared to subside a little, giving way to perplexity and a glimmer of something else. Possibly realization. With a softer voice, she questioned, "But what about the prestige? If anyone can shop here, what makes it special?" Zendaya gave a soft smile. "The experience we offer, the caliber of our goods, and the manner in which we handle our clients are what set it apart. Every one of our clients, establishing a standard that benefits everyone, is what prestige is all about. Not excluding others." The air was silent for a minute. The woman's shoulders then drooped, much to the surprise of all. I never thought about it that way," she said in a low voice. Zendaya placed a hand on her arm. "I encourage you to try our new strategy, even though change can be challenging. When we welcome everyone, you might be astonished at how much more enjoyable the experience can be." Slowly, the woman's fury gave way to thoughtfulness as she nodded. Zendaya could see the woman's viewpoint starting to change as she led her through some of their more recent collections, describing the ideas behind each item. By the time the customer left with multiple purchases from their new inclusive queue, Zendaya felt both excited and exhausted. The exchange had been lucrative as well as difficult. She had hoped to inspire a change like this. Zendaya convened her crew for a debriefing as the store slowed down for the evening. She utilized the incident as a teaching opportunity for everyone, and commended the young associate for remaining calm in a trying circumstance. "We're not just changing our policies," she clarified. "We're changing people's perspectives, and it won't always be simple. However, it's in times like these that we truly make an impact. Motivated by the day's activities, the squad nodded as they scattered. Pamela stayed at the back. Pamela hesitated before saying, "There's something else we need to discuss." Zendaya arched an eyebrow. "Oh? What are you thinking about?" Pamela inhaled deeply. "This concerns the provider of our new eco-friendly line. After some investigation, I don't believe they are as morally upright as they say they are." Zendaya scrunched her brow. "What do you mean?" Pamela presented her findings throughout the following hour. Despite promoting themselves as ethical and sustainable, the suppliers' overseas factories engaged in numerous dubious activities. These were not strictly against the law, but they definitely did not meet Zendaya's expectations for the store. Zendaya slumped back in her chair, her thoughts racing as Pamela concluded her presentation. They intended for this line to play a significant role in their next collection. Canceling it would result in a major financial loss, in addition to the logistical challenge of quickly locating a new provider. But Zendaya realized there was only one correct decision after examining Pamela's sincere expression and the proof she had painstakingly gathered. Zendaya remarked, "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Pamela," with a tone of quiet resolve. "First thing Monday, we'll begin searching for a new supplier, one that really aligns with our values." Pamela's eyes got bigger. Zendaya held out a hand and said, "But the collection launch is in just a few weeks and the financial impact—" "You're correct. It won't be simple. However, all of our other efforts are pointless if we sacrifice our morals for convenience or financial gain. We must not only speak the talk, but also act on it." Inspired by Zendaya's dedication, John came into the office as Pamela was leaving. He had heard enough to know what was going on. "You know," John remarked, taking a seat across from Zendaya, "I would have considered you insane a year ago for coming to such a conclusion. However, I now believe you to be correct. It's the only option that makes sense for the project we're working on." Zendaya grinned wearily, her thoughts racing as the weight of the decision settled in. "It's going to be difficult. To make this happen, we'll have to put in more effort." With a flash of enthusiasm in his eyes, John nodded. "Well, we had better get going. Tonight, I'll begin contacting possible new suppliers." Zendaya watched John head off to make calls, her thoughts drifting as she gazed out the window. Buckhead was bathed in a warm glow as the sun began to set. People passed by the business, and some paused to admire the window displays, which now featured mannequins in diverse sizes, shapes, and styles. The store that had once symbolized exclusivity and perfection was evolving into something far more inclusive. Despite the difficulties ahead, Zendaya couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. The industry was changing right before her eyes. It wasn't just about the store anymore. It was about making a difference on a broader scale. Every challenging decision, every small victory, was pushing them closer to the transformation Zendaya envisioned. Zendaya's mind wandered back to that first day when she had entered the store without permission, encountering Bill's resistance to change. The prejudice she faced was a sharp contrast to the progress she had made, but she knew there was still much work to be done. She walked back to her desk, sat down, and pulled out a notepad. The ideas began to flow, plans for community outreach, collaborations with emerging and diverse designers, and strategies for improving the ethics and transparency of their supply chain. As her pen moved rapidly across the page, the list grew longer. It was clear to Zendaya now, the journey ahead would be challenging. She anticipated more difficult clients, moral dilemmas, and fierce opposition from an industry built on exclusivity. But as she looked at the growing list of initiatives, a sense of resolve washed over her. This was no longer just about running a profitable store. It was about transforming an entire industry, proving that ethics, inclusivity, and luxury could exist side by side. She wanted to create a space where everyone, regardless of size, race, gender, or background, could feel beautiful and valued. Zendaya stood up and gathered her things as the last of the light from the setting sun disappeared behind the horizon. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she was ready. As she stepped out of the store, Zendaya paused for a moment, taking in the structure that had evolved into something far more meaningful than just a place of business. In an industry long criticized for its exclusivity and ethical shortcomings, this store stood as a beacon of change, a symbol of hope and progress in Atlanta. With a smile, Zendaya turned away from the building and walked into the night. Her mind was already shifting gears, preparing for the struggles and victories to come. The retail revolution was barely getting started, and she was determined to lead the way. Would you have taken a different strategy, or would you have remained cool and determined throughout the situation? If you found this story of prejudice, redemption, and the impact of standing up for what's right compelling, comment where you are watching from, and please consider subscribing to my channel. Thank you for being a part of this journey.